chair, Lucia Visconti Parisio. I just introduce briefly myself. I'm from Milano Bicocca University, and I am board member and vice president of the Italian Association for Energy Economics. So welcome to all participants, speakers, and people connected. We have a number of 3 papers today. They have a common characteristics. They are all applied papers considering different country cases. So the first one is about Saudi Arabia, the second one is Armenia, and the third one is about the European area. I will just to introduce the speakers. And the first speaker is Jeyhun Mikayilov. He's a member of the KAPSARC in Saudi Arabia, and he holds a PhD in applied mathematics. So he has a quantitative background, and before joining KAPSARC, he was assistant professor in Azerbaijan. Also, he spent a number of periods visiting around the world, including the US. Then we have Yermone Sargsyan, I hope to pronounce it correctly, and he holds a PhD from Charles University in Prague and comes from Armenia. Then we have Vittorio, who is a board member of the Italian Association of Energy Economics. And he worked for a long time in the Department for Energy Studies at AIEE, and he has a very large experience in the energy industry. So since there are just 3 papers, I think that each is allowed 25 minutes for presentation, and then we have 10 to 15 minutes for a final discussion. So questions and discussion will be, for all 3 papers, will be at the end of the session. So we can start from the first paper, and the title is Carbon Dioxide Emission Baseline Forecast for Saudi Arabia using the Structural Time Series Model and Autometrics. So, Jeyhun, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Lucia. And thanks to the organizers of the conference for giving us a chance to present our research. This is joint research with my colleagues, Anwar Qasim and Lester Hand. Can you see the slides? No problem? Yeah, good. So the motivation behind of this study. As is well known, to tackle the threat of climate change, countries worldwide have signed the Paris Agreement, and the parties to the Paris Agreement are required to submit their domestic climate plans detailing their mitigation measures known as national determined contributions, basically NDSs. These plans detail countries' ambitions and efforts to combat and respond to climate change. NDS are communicated at 5-year intervals, and each successive NDS must represent an increase in ambition of over the previous period. As a developing country, in case of Saudi Arabia, it also submitted like the NDS, the first one in 2015, and the mitigation plan was 130 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. This total emission reduction target includes CO2 emission reductions, among other greenhouse gases. In 2021, Saudi Arabia updated its NDS, and it set a new, more ambitious target of reducing and removing 278 million of CO2 equivalent emissions annually by 2030. So they set the target here as 2030. In addition, in 2022, Saudi Arabia launched a new kind of ambition or target to have net zero by 2060. Saudi Arabia set its target relative to the baseline emissions scenario. Such targets are commonly referred to as baseline targets, and most developing countries have adopted such targets. Baseline targets require a baseline scenario, that is a counterfactual projection that describes the evolution of emissions without any additional policy efforts. The IPCC defines or describes this baseline scenario as based on the assumption that no mitigation policies or measures will be implemented beyond those that are already in force. So Saudi Arabia set target for 2030, and then there's another target for 2060. However, Saudi Arabia's NDS doesn't include quantitative or numerical information about its baseline scenario. So considering this point and to fill in this gap in the literature, in this research, we apply univariate framework to model Saudi Arabia's total CO2 emissions, and then using the preferred or final model to make baseline forecasts for Saudi Arabian CO2 emissions up until 2060. We mainly focus on total CO2 emissions because it's a main greenhouse gas emission in Saudi Arabia's total greenhouse gas emissions total. Saying so, we had, of course, literature review if there is any paper dealing with the same purpose or aim. And based on our best knowledge, we found just two papers, journal articles. One is Köhne and Bouquet 2010, which modeled 25 top emitters, including Saudi Arabia. They used simple trend relationship, simple deterministic trend relationship, and made forecast until 2030. Their forecast for Saudi Arabian CO2 emissions by 2030 ranged from 500 million tons to 571 million tons. This forecast is for 2030, but in 2022, actually for 2019, Saudi Arabia's total emissions already 575. There is another paper by Al-Shammari, 2020, and he also makes forecasts for Saudi Arabian total CO2 emissions by 2050. Shammari's forecasts for 2030 and 2050 are 643 for 2030, and for 2050 is 2,156, which is relatively high. There is another online tool, which is called Energy Policy Simulator, which also makes baseline scenarios. And the forecast by Energy Policy Simulator by 2050 is around 1,000. Also Climate Action Tracker, which also makes some projections for different countries. They didn't actually explicitly show their model, but based on different scenario runs, they conclude that Saudi Arabia's CO2 emissions will increase in coming few years, and then after 2025, it will stabilize. So based on the literature review, we concluded that there is not a research dealing with CO2 emission modeling and checking the 2060 and the 2030 targets. So considering this point, we, as I mentioned, we apply two different techniques. One is, in both techniques, we use a general to specific modeling approach, well-known approach in econometrics. But in one case, we applied autometrics multipass block search machine learning algorithm using PC-GIF. Basically, this is an approach proposed by David Henry and his colleagues. And in other approach, we applied structural time series modeling approach, which is proposed by Harvey. In our modeling, as I mentioned, it's a univariate modeling approach. We used 4 legs, considering the sample size, 4 legs of the dependent variable, and trend. But unlike the conventional econometric approach, here we treat the trend of the relationship being stochastic. So it's not deterministic. First, we consider it as a time varying or stochastic trend, but based on the estimation results, we conclude whether it is stochastic or deterministic trend. In autometrics approach, as shown in equation A1, and as I described, we have 4 legs of the dependent variable. And autometrics using PCGIF software automatically chooses intervention dummies, which means it automatically assigns impulse indicator saturation dummy, which is referred to as pulse dummy, step indicator saturation dummy, which is referred as step dummy, and difference impulse indicator saturation, basically blip dummy, and then trend indicator saturation dummy, which is referred in conventional economics as break-in trend. So autometrics automatically assigns all of these dummies for each observation. Basically, the number of parameters estimated is usually bigger than the number of observations. And then, since it's mathematically hard to deal with, autometrics applies block search machine learning algorithm to choose the relevant dummies. What if you don't choose these dummies, as is known from econometric theory? We might result with biased estimations, biased parameter estimations. Also, it might be a problem of variable omitted variable problem. So in this approach, the trend at the beginning treated as a time varying, because we assign break-in trend dummies for each observation, and based on the search algorithm, then we decide whether the trend is deterministic or stochastic. The autometrics estimation procedure consists of 2 steps. In the first step, we fix the theory-related variables. In our case, 4 legs of the dependent variable. We fix them, and then first we choose the relevant indicator saturation dummies. In the first step, we fix the chosen dummies, and you search the theory-related variables. Basically, in our case, 4 legs of the dependent variable. In structural time series modeling approach by Harvey, the substantial difference is treating the trend as a stochastic trend, which means to treat the slope and the intercept of the trend to be time varying. Basically, in many cases, we use just random walk for these parameters. So it based on the variance of the estimated slope and level, basically mu t and beta t, based on the variance of the error terms, we decide whether the trend is stochastic or it's indeed a deterministic trend. If they are 0, if the variance are 0, it means that the parameters are basically deterministic. So for estimation, we use data from NR data, and the sample size is 1984 to 2019. When we say total CO2 emissions, we mean all total CO2 emissions, excluding associated land use and change and forestry. Also, using these 2 approaches, we made our estimations, and the results are depicted here. As we can see from equation 2, with autometrics, we have just first and second lagged values, while the first one is positive and the second one is negative. When we combine the coefficients, theoretically, we see that the coefficient of the lagged values around 1, which means for the relationship, there is a upward trend. So CO2 emissions are increasing over time. And there is only one chosen dummy, it's impulse indicator saturation dummy or pulse dummy for 1984. So based on this estimation, we conclude that in-sample trend is basically deterministic trend, and there is no stochasticity or breaking trend. Based on the STSM results, the result here is, it seems to be different, but it's not different. So in terms of the, so to speak, related variables, we have first lagged value and third lagged value, unlike the automatic results. And if we combine the coefficients, we end up with relatively or slightly negative coefficient, which seems to be decreasing trend. But when we have a look on the estimated trend, we see that actually also the slope of the trend is time varying, and it's first increasing and then slightly decreasing, stabilizing, and then starts to increase. And when we have a look on the level or trend of the relationship, we see that it's also actually increasing or upward trend. So again, it might be seen that, okay, the results are different, but no. In the second case with STSM, the relationship is driven by the trend, which is again upward sloping trend. So then, using the estimated equations, we made our CO2 emissions baseline forecasts. As we can see from these results, like numbers up until 2019 are historical values, and after that time, these are forecasted values. So we see, let's say, the two target years, 2030 and 2060. For 2030, autometrics baseline forecast values 671, while with STSM it is 632. But for 2060, again, with autometrics it is 941, and with STSM it is 948. So they are like quite close to each other, which we would expect. And then, just as called by David Henry and his colleagues, just as insurance policy, we use a simple average because you never know which model will will work better out of the sample. We can make some statements about in-sample characteristics or quality, but it's hard to make some conclusions out of the sample. Of course, there are many techniques and criteria, but when we sum up them, we can conclude that there is no way to be sure about the out-of-sample characteristic or quality of the model. So we just use simple average as an insurance policy, and based on the average baseline scenario, we have for 2030 we have 651 million tons of CO2 equivalent, and for 2060 we have 944 million tons of CO2 equivalent. And then, okay, we have close results from two estimation techniques, but how about the uncertainty embodied to this baseline forecast? As we can see from these figures, in 3A we have automatic results, in B STSM, and then in C we have the combined forecast results. Just to compare at the same time the quality, so to speak, of the estimation techniques, as we see, like close to the forecast origin, which is 2019, the uncertainty with autometrics is higher, while with STSM the uncertainty is lower, which means the confidence interval with STSM is slightly narrower than the confidence interval for autometrics. But when we go beyond, as we see, the forecast confidence interval or the uncertainty is really huge with STSM results. But when we combine, of course, since it's based on the average, simple average, we see for the combined forecast a relatively small confidence interval, or so to speak, uncertainty. Of course, as is known from the econometric forecasting literature, we know that the econometric forecasts are better for the short-run forecasts. compared with the DSG, CG, and other models. So this, of course, it gives some idea about the potential future behavior of total CO2 emissions, but to make certain policy decisions, it's better to use the short run, relatively short run forecast from the econometric techniques. Then to conclude, again, like many other countries, Saudi Arabia is also trying to do like its best to mitigate CO2 emissions as well as other greenhouse gases. And it set two ambitious targets, one for 2030, to decrease, to mitigate total greenhouse gas emissions by around 300 million tons. And then another ambitious target for 2060, which aims to reach net zero. It's not zero CO2 emissions, but it's not zero emissions, but net zero emissions. So of course, these are like ambitious targets, and based on our baseline scenario projections, again, by 2060, we forecasted 944 million tons of CO2 emissions equivalent. And this projection demonstrates the magnitude of additional policy efforts required for Saudi Arabia to achieve net zero emission by 2060, as it pledged in its target. Moreover, the confidence intervals, again, for our long-run projections are very wide, or relatively wide, so to speak. Thus, these baseline projections are more appropriate for setting nearer-term targets. To sum up, this study provides a robust baseline projection for Saudi Arabia CO2 emissions. Why I say robust? Because both relatively cutting-edge techniques concluded very similar results. We project that they will rise by 651 million tons by 2060, which is target year for Saudi Arabia's NDS in a baseline scenario. And they will increase by more than 900 by 2060, the year in which Saudi Arabia aims to achieve net zero emissions. Nevertheless, the rapid pace of change and reform in Saudi Arabia may alter the evolution of its baseline CO2 emissions. As you know, currently in Saudi Arabia, we have so-called energy price reforms or energy transition period. So many change transitions are happening. So, of course, to consider kind of the new economic behavior or environment, it's better to have to assess the policies, which one might work better. We need a multivariate model to have similar different scenario runs, and based on those different scenario runs to assess which scenario or policy is more optimal or more feasible. And we, with my colleagues, currently are working on modeling CO2 emissions and also other greenhouse gas emissions for Saudi Arabia using a multivariate approach. This is all from my side. We'll be happy to have, if you have any question, we'll be happy to share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and to stick to the right time. And we decided to have all the questions at the end of the session. So please interrupt your presentation. Thank you very much, Jeyhun. And now the next speaker is Yermone. Is Yermone online?
Hello, can you hear me?
Okay, yes.
I had some technical problems in the beginning. I couldn't connect, but I think now it's better, okay. And I can hear you and you can hear me and everything is perfect.
Okay.
First thing to note, I'm not Yermone. She got actually COVID and lost her voice. So that's I'm one of the co-authors.
To have a female.
Yes, that's why I'm not a female. Yes.
Okay. I can see it.
Okay. So let me.
With you, Yermone. Okay. Best wishes. I hope she recovers.
Yeah, I will let you know.
Okay.
Definitely.
So
thank you.
You are presenting the paper, and the title is Social Cues and Electricity Consumptions, Evidence from a Randomized Controlled Trial in Armenia. So you have 25 minutes. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So let me share my screen. Okay, so I think you should, okay, share screen, yeah.
I think you have to choose the windows you want to share.
Yes, it says me that I need to give it a special permission, and for that I need to quit and reopen. I will quit and reopen real quick.
Okay, but I think, I don't know if there is someone helping us from the conference organization.
I think it should be quick, like 10 or 15 seconds. Okay.
Eccomi Lucia, volevo solo avvisare che le impostazioni da parte nostra sono aperte come...
Ok, adesso lui prova a rientrare. Ok, perfetto, grazie. Prova a rientrare, vediamo se adesso riesce a fare lo sharing. Grazie.
Prego.
Ok.
Yes, Herman. No.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
We can hear from you.
Okay, thanks God. Let me share my screen now.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for, yeah. let me just like this, yeah. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for waiting till I resolve my technical problems. My name is Salim, and I'm going to present the work titled Social Cues and Electricity Consumption Evidence from a randomized control trial in Armenia. So this is a joint project with Yermone, Sargsyan, me, and Professor Sylvester Van Kotten. Why do we need to do this kind of research? Right, so the first slide gives us a little bit of motivation about this. So to avoid serious, possibly disastrous climate effects, global greenhouse gas emissions need to drop by half by 2030 and reach net zero by a mid of century. As households represent over 30% of all energy consumed, governments across the world are instituting various programs and efforts to reduce residential energy consumption. One of the programs that are the most prevalent, lowest cost, are the demand-side management programs. The demand-side management programs aim to lower the energy demand of the household and thus to reduce carbon emissions. In this study, we implement an information provision experiment in a developing country. The developing countries are precisely the countries where the most rapid growth in energy consumption is observed, and many results and outcomes observed in the Western world prove to be hard to replicate in the context of the developing countries. Therefore, this study provides further evidence on the effect of several information provision experiments on the energy consumption behavior of households in Armenia. In our treatments, we provide the households with peer comparison reports with regards to the energy consumption and associated costs. Therefore, the information also has a social dimension captured by the comparison we make to the average values of similar households. More on this in the next slide. So this is just a little bit of background for the energy costs of electricity in Armenia. So as we can see here, they have a block rate tariffs where up to some consumptions they pay at the lower price, and then the cost goes up by about 5% also as you move up the block tiers. So this 46 Armenian drams are about 10 cents at current exchange rates. So also we can see here that the main energy source for heating is natural gas. About 12% are using electricity, and more than 36% are actually still using wood. So in this experiment, we have 3 groups in total, 1 control group and 2 treatment groups. So this, thus we have about 300 households which we treat for 6 months in total. So group C is a control group. This group is contacted but not offered any information provision, and the electricity consumption is recorded every month. Group S is a social non-group. This group received monthly reports on the household electricity consumption for the preceding months. This consumption compared to the average consumption in other similar households and reported to the household. The difference between household consumption and the consumption of similar households also calculated and reported. Group SM social norm and monetary feedback group. This group received monthly reports on household electricity consumption for the preceding months. This consumption compared to the average consumption in other similar households and reported to the household. The difference between the household consumption and the consumption of similar households also calculated and reported. The group SM also received a report on a realized or potential, depending on whether they're above or below the average group consumption of monetary savings resulting from their electricity consumption compared to the average consumption in other similar households. I hope this is more or less clear. So group C is just a control group. Group S, which just gives them information about their monthly electricity consumption. And based on whether they're above or below the average consumption of similar households, we show their saved electricity or how much was actually consumed above the average. Then we have a third group, which is a social norm and monetary feedback group. In this group, what we do, besides giving them feedback on their electricity consumption, we also give them the feedback on how much they have spent in monetary terms on this electricity consumption. And this we again compare it to the similar households. So unfortunately, this is in Armenian because the experiment is run in Armenia. But to give you a context, this is the social norm treatment, and this is what the households see in their reports for the second group S. Now, only the reports only about the electricity consumption. So here, for example, they say it's the consumption of similar households to yours, and this one is your consumption, right? And each month they receive this kind of report, and here they can see how much below or above the average they have consumed. And if we move to the reports for the group where we combine the social norm and cost of the treatment, here we can see that besides the electricity, they also receive how much they have spent on the electricity. So what are our hypotheses? We project that the households receiving peer comparison reports with regard to the consumption of the energy and its associated cost should exhibit reduced levels of energy consumption, especially among those households which are reported to have higher than peer average levels of energy consumption. We also project that some households may start investing in energy efficiency by buying energy efficient home appliances, installing PV, solar panels, installing energy efficient windows and doors, among others. So this, we did not had an opportunity to check yet because the data processing is still in progress. But because this is still a work in progress, this is what we're going to do in the future. So now we're running the second stage of surveys where we ask them whether they have purchased any energy efficient appliances or installed any energy efficient windows, doors, and etc. But this one, the first hypothesis, we are able already to check on this stage of our research. So this is just a descriptive statistics of the selected sample. And this is quite representative for the Yerevan because we are collecting the data in Yerevan. And this is not representative of the whole Armenia because the population in Yerevan and in Armenia differ substantially across the characteristics, but still about 1 million people live in Yerevan, so it is 1/3 of the whole population of Armenia. So we have quite a representative sample for the Yerevan. So this is the basic econometric model that we use. So it is a standard difference in difference framework. And here alpha I and tau t stand for the household fixed effects and monthly fixed effects respectively. And what we're trying to do here, we're going to include interaction of the treatment variables with their observation in the post-treatment period. So it is a standard difference in difference type of estimation. So here, beta 1 is a coefficient on the information group, and beta 2 is a coefficient on the joint group on the information plus the cost. And E and epsilon IT is our idiosyncratic error term. So when we run our estimations for the whole sample, we can see that although we observe some substantial monthly reduction for our treatments, those are statistically insignificant. So for the whole sample, our results are statistically insignificant. But once we start to narrow it down and examine so-called heterogeneous effects, we can see that those households where so we conducted our interviews over the phone. These interviews were conducted by a specialized firm, and among others, they have also recorded who picked up the phone and who has answered the questions and who is paying the bills. Usually, the person who picked up the phone also paying the bills, because we asked so those to interview only those who actually paying the bills for the electricity. So here, if the management of the payment and collecting the bills is done by female, and we send the reports to them, we can see that actually for those subsample, the treatment is actually statistically significant at 5%, and there is a substantial reduction, like of 22 kilowatts of electricity consumption per month. Once we narrow it down further for the females who actually have a higher education, the treatment goes up to 43 kilowatts per month. So it's almost the effect almost doubles in size. So from here, we can conclude that in our data, we indeed observe a heterogeneous effects, and the treatment is most efficient in case of females and especially educated females. So this is very important for the policy implications. So the first conclusion is that the policy can be targeted at females and they should be informed about their consumption. And secondly, if the females are educated, this effect is even larger. So we need to pay attention to the education of the females in the developing countries. So this is it. So if you have any questions, feel free to email Yermone. You can also email me if you wish. I can send my email afterwards. So this is it, and I look forward for any comments and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, now end the presentation, please.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. So thank you a lot for the presentation. And the question will be all at the end of the session, as I said before.
Okay.
And now it's the time to hear the presentation of Vittorio Dermo. And the title is The Price of Gas in Europe Toward an Epochal Change. Vittorio, the floor is yours. Please start your presentation.
Thank you, Lucia. I try to share my screen.
Okay, we can see it.
Okay. So, first of all, good morning to you all. I present a paper which is maybe different from others, which is not a quantitative paper, because the reason is that the period that I have examined is too short and there is not a statistical basis. So I've been obliged to make most political or qualitative considerations. The paper has been prepared in conjunction with my colleague Diego Cavanin, with whom I will share many views on the evolution of natural gas. So to start, my consideration is starts from a view of the European energy system. The European energy system boasts the primacy in the transition policies toward a new energy system, completely decarbonized. This system, unfortunately, has suffered two deep shocks in recent years, one linked to the pandemic and the other linked to the crisis in the relations with Russia, which has had particularly heavy repercussions on the European energy system. If I may add a personal consideration, I would say that Europe is experiencing the first European energy crisis, differently from the oil crisis that practically involved all the countries around the world, the United States and everything. The crisis that we are commenting as serious repercussions mostly on Europe. So, and Europe and especially the gas sector. So something completely new. And this crisis shows also the lack of, or the limits of the European energy policy. I remember the big energy crisis, they saw the interventions of the International Energy Agency, but now the policy, European policy toward this crisis is very limited. They are discussing a lot, but the facts, in my view, are quite limited. So as I told you, that this paper examined the qualitative point of view, the lack of adequate statistical basis, the consequences of this second crisis of the policies from the point of view of prices. So I mostly devoted my attention to what happened to the prices, gas prices in Europe, and the efforts have been made to put all the prices in the same unit, which is not easy because natural gas is something which is measured in million BTU, a lot of megawatt euro megawatt hours. So to ease the understanding and to show the deeper of what happened, I put everything all practically almost my slides are expressed in dollars per barrel. Maybe it's not. It's a way to show more clearly where the impact of what happened. So I started with just one graph, which shows the role of natural gas on the European scene. This graph shows clearly how natural gas is important on the scene. So in fact, in recent years, we have been accustomed to talk only about environment, how to reduce, and the renewables. This is maybe is not good because we have lost sight of the other sources of energy. And when we have been confronted with the crisis, we had the serious problems. So maybe natural gas is something very important on European scene. This is clearly, you see this graph, but has been neglected because the idea was that with the arrival of renewables, so natural gas would not a problem. So this has been a very mistake. So not evaluating the importance of natural gas, not only from the point of view of demand, but especially from the point of view of supply. So we move to this this next slide. So if we look at this slide, we see how small is the percentage of natural gas production on the total of energy consumption in Europe. So the trend is clearly decreasing, and this while the demand is yes, is a bit decreasing, but the demand is very important. And the the price that we had to pay to this situation is will be developed in the following slides. So especially if we consider that one of the main goals of the European policy is the diversification and the security of supply. So if we look at this graph, I think it's absolutely licit to this terrible reduction of the part of the domestic supply in Europe. So I think to some kind of reasoning on this data. As far as supply is concerned, the situation even before the crisis was not satisfactory from the point of view of security and diversification. In 2021, domestic production already in sharp decline amounted to about 44 billion cubic meters, or 11% of total consumption, equal to about 400 million cubic meters, while the imports provided the remaining 89%, equal to 356 billion. This is just to show the impact of this number. The latter were divided between 260 billion cubic meters arrived in Europe by pipeline and 96 billion cubic meters arrived by LNG carriers. Clearly, a decidedly unbalanced situation in favor of gas pipeline, with a weight of 73%. So this shows a system which is for historically reason had chosen the pipeline instead of liquefied gas. Of course, there have been historical reasons, the cost, the facility in the case of Europe, the proximity to Russia. But now we have discovered that this system is so rigid had a terrible price, a terrible cost. So this slide shows the situation of European situation at the 2021. This is the most of the natural gas supply in Europe. It shows clearly that we, as a source of supply from a country, we can consider close to its OECD country. The other countries are other Europe. Azerbaijan is important, especially in perspective, but we see the big number is Russia. Russia has been something that has grown without control and has led to some problems. Then we have Algeria and we have Libya. Libya is another weak point of the European energy policy. Libya has a great potential for Italy and for Europe. Unfortunately, the lack of energy policy, or I would say energy, but political or foreign policy toward this country has led to very bad conditions, economic conditions in Libya. That's why in this graph, it shows a very little contribution from Libya, instead, which would have a potential to cover at least 1/3 of the gas that Europe receives from Russia. And considering also that in the case of Libya, there is an existing pipeline which could provide 8 billion cubic meters per year, which is not used. So in the mess of this situation, we have an additional cost for not using a resource which is there, is not utilized. So this is the overall picture. Very big role of Russia and the big role of natural gas by pipeline. Now we move to LNG. LNG is a more limited amount of the European LNG supply. And this graph shows also that also in this case, we have a contribution from Russia. So this increased the role of Russia. So the great countries that provide LNG to Europe, in fact, are US, which is one of the countries with big futures also in perspective, and other countries which may be in the future. Presently, in spite of their potential, they give a little limited contribution. Important is Qatar, but Algeria, for instance, Algeria will have a bigger potential. Nigeria, so this practically at the end of this presentation, this should be transformed deeply to have bigger numbers in the future to change the structure of the European supply system. Now, now that we have seen the basic numbers and what happened, maybe I would say what is still happening, the crisis in terms of prices. Starting from this basis, in the first half of 21, the gas market had to face the first signs of a crisis. The emergence of some problems in the growth of renewables, lower nuclear production, accelerated decline in European oil and gas production, have enormously increased the pressure on imported gas that has found itself in position of supplier of last resort. Faced with this new situation, there's been an historic change of attitude on the part of Russia. This country, which came to control 50% of Europe's gas imports and about 40% of its own needs in conjunction with the strong recovery in gas demand, began a policy of supply control to increase its revenues, but also to support a policy of expansion of its role in the world, which had already had a precedent in the reconquest of Crimea. The change has profoundly changed the two fundamental features of the international gas market, that of trust between buyer and seller, and that of price and supply stability that had been the basis of large pipeline supply contracts between Russia and most European countries, including mostly Germany and Italy. So some graphs which show the evolution of prices. This is the situation of oil and gas pricing in Europe in the period 2015-2020, so at the beginning of the COVID. We have no time just to enter into details, but a general comment is the following. The red line is the price of oil, and down there are the main categories of prices of gas. The green line estimated the top prices, so the contracts, top long-term contracts for South Europe, and estimated top prices for North Europe, and TTF prices, which are practically the market, the spot market of gas. So the first general feature that until the break of the pandemic, the prices of gas were lower than the prices of oil. So, of course, there are differences depending on the situation of the oil market, the gas markets. So the general feature is that the gas prices were lower. And another peculiarity is that the prices of the TTF, so the spot market, in many instances were lower than the prices of the long-term contract because there was abundance of supply of gas. So the prices on this market, which is a short-term, day-by-day market, were lower. When we start seeing something. This is the collapse of oil due to the pandemic. But after the pandemic, the price of oil rise again. But we see also some things that shows some change. The price here of the TTF prices, which are the prices established on the market, which is Netherlands, goes up the prices of the traditional prices. So this is signs that the market is showing market signs of change. But of course, this is only the beginning. Then we have the period of interest. Most of interest for us is the period the 2015-2022. So this should be. Oh, this is more in detail. You see clearly the prices always under the prices of natural gas under the price of oil. And starting August 21, then the prices of gas start having their own evolution. And the prices, the market that leads the change, the big change, is exactly the price, the TTF. TTF is the spot market of gas. And why is such a big difference, especially in this period, which follows the event of the war between Ukraine and Russia? The reason is that in this market, which is small in comparison with the overall quantities, used to arrive Russian gas. With the war, this market in Rotterdam has lost part of its gas, while the European gas demand was increasing for reasons that I mentioned before. There was some problems with nuclear, some problems with renewables, less wind, and so on. So big pressure, and on a market which is on a spot basis, the prices tend to give the signals, and not only to give the signals, but also to amplify them. So we should have the maximum amplify that we reach a level which is very difficult to understand. Also, that $340 per barrel. Of course, also the prices of long-term contracts went up. So this is, of course, this has put into crisis, inflation crisis in Europe, but generally the crisis have extended to all the European countries. And why the gas has lost contact with the, let us say, with the reality, the oil price with this linked to other consideration has started to decline. In this graph, you see that at the beginning of the winter season, there has been a reduction on this TTF price, but then the prices started to recover, and they still recovering. Why this sudden? This is the consequence that would be interesting to study is the price effect. Given this big increase, Europe has reduced dramatically the demand for natural gas, and this had and also the temperatures. The autumn season has been very hot, so practically this market reflects immediately what is going on as decreased. But with the starting the winter season, the gas prices started to climb again. But the conclusion is that practically the situation is not yet settled, and in my view will be not settled soon. So this other graph is a recap of the big revolution of gas prices over a long period. So clearly this slide defines a theme for other papers of analysis, because it clearly at this point there is a fracture as something here, something that will reserve further analysis. But to show that what happened, what is happening is not only a problem of Europe, but as world implication, there is this final this graph which shows the evolution of the international prices at world level. So until 21, also in this graph, there is the price of oil and the prices of natural gas below. Starting this year, the explosion has touched all the market, especially of course, the TTF. It's interesting to know that only in one region the prices have increased, but not dramatically. Is the lines in here, which are the prices in the United States. United States happily is an happy island in this big turmoil because they have been able to increase their production and also to export a lot of natural gas to Europe. And this gas exported to Europe has been an important role, at least to solve the problem from of lack of Russian gas, at least from the quantitative point of view, not completely from the point of view of prices. Finally, this is the graph of the daily prices at TTF, and I put here the prices in another hub, which is located in Spain, and reflects more the prices of LNG. So maybe this shows that it's more, more not so sensitive, not so with spikes less pronunciated, but of course also the LNG has been touched by the crisis. And as a reference, I put this blue line, which show the period in 95. So the distance between the situation, which is the radical situation we can accept as normal, and what happened this year. So the difference is so big that it shows clearly that something happened very, very important, very big to be solved. So having seen all this graph, we can move to this some conclusions. And in these conclusions, I spend some concepts, some ideas on the role of LNG. LNG has been the great protagonist of this change thanks to the first upgrading of receiving infrastructure in Northern Europe and the full use of those located in Spain, Italy, and France that will form the basis of a system that will have the Mediterranean as its center of gravity. The present system is based mostly on Northern Europe with the gas arriving from Russia. So Russia won't be the supplier of the future, and Italy and the Mediterranean has a great potential to become a new center of gravity for the supply of gas. To achieve that stabilization of the market after a phase that will still be characterized by strong volatility, is the presently what we are experiencing now, that certainly will affect also the 23. It will be necessary that all the initiatives undertaken in this emergency period, those of Italy, they know that we are building infrastructure in Tuscany and also near Ravenna to increase the capability to receive more LNG. But also Germany is very active to build the LNG terminals, to create a new supply system based on LNG, and a bigger role for the Mediterranean is implemented without delay. So any delay on the new infrastructures will cause problems. LNG, why this, I would favor LNG. LNG has all the characteristics of a global market commodity, no subject to discriminatory practices by a single country, what we have seen, or by cartels of producers, as occurred in the past with OPEC for oil. of course, they countries like the United States, Australia, and a lot of other countries, that it's not easy to see the resurgence of a big cartel. And then having a big market of energy, if one country has problems, it's possible to move from one country of another. With the expansion of the supply, of which there are all the prerequisites, also in terms of reserves, gas prices will return to levels much lower than the current ones, but which still have to be sufficient to ensure its competitiveness vis-a-vis oil and renewables. This could be around 40–50% per barrel, also envisaged in the basic assumption of the World Energy Outlook of the Energy Outlook published by the International Agency published a month ago. So thank you for your attention, and I'm ready to answer any question.
Thank you, Vittorio. Congratulations to all presenters, because they was in the allotted time. So we have 15 minutes for the discussion. Please, Vittorio, leave the online presentation. Close the window. Okay. So, well, I open the floor to questions. I don't know if there are, because I can't see if there are colleagues connected, and if someone has questions for the presenters. I don't see anyone. In that case, I have questions for all the presenters, if I can. So, starting from the first presentation, Jeyhun, well, I have seen that in your baseline scenario, the amount of CO2 emissions are increasing until 2050. And maybe I would like to ask if you know what are the main policy measures that in Saudi Arabia have been introduced or discussed at the moment to accomplish the very strict objective of reduction of emission.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. In terms of like mitigation policy, greenhouse gas mitigation policy, in last year, Saudi Arabia launched a green initiative. So it kind of targets starting by 2030 to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions by around 300 million tons of CO2 equivalent. In addition, Saudi Arabia launched a kind of economic policy approach, which is called circular carbon economy, which was, I believe, like trending in years ago in Europe. So this is another approach like being applied in Saudi Arabia currently. The other one, Saudi Arabia is looking for carbon capture and storage potential. And one more is Saudi Arabia also has, as one of the policies, the greening policy up until 2060. And it's like, for now, there are like huge ambitions in terms of planting and for like making.
Are you devising some specific policy measure, like, for example, carbon taxation or market for permits, or which are the main policy instruments?
For now, for now, the so-called optimal policies are being discussed. But Saudi Arabia, actually, we worked on what policy in terms of carbon taxation might be relevant policy for Saudi Arabia. For now, Saudi Arabia is trying to implement so-called implicit carbon taxation, which means like lifting the energy price subsidies. You know, prices in Saudi Arabia, energy prices historically have been subsidized and highly subsidized. But now they gradually lifting the subsidies, which could be considered as an implicit taxation policy. And again, this is like hot topic, I believe, in all countries, and especially in Saudi Arabia, because CO2 emissions, more than 90% of CO2 emissions in Saudi Arabia, like they come from fuel consumption, fuel-based. So yeah, it's being discussed. So it's hot topic, as in many developing countries, even in developed countries.
Anyway, we will be in the KAPSARC at the beginning of February for the next AIEE conference. So I will be there. We can discuss for a long time of Saudi Arabian policy measures. So thank you very much for your reply. Are there other questions for the first paper for Jeyhun? Vittorio.
No, in fact, also in my case, I am a little hit by the prospects of such large increase of CO2 emissions in Saudi Arabia. So I heard with attention what our colleague said about the prospect to analyze the problems, to do something, because although the emissions of Saudi Arabia are not the most important in the world, any way to reduce the CO2 emissions, each country must do something. So I would say that these projections are interesting, but also alarming. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. If there are no other questions, well, I have a question on the second paper presented, that on the field experiment. Okay, are you there? Okay, well, my is a specific question about the slide in which you presented the results of your econometric analysis made on data. And I don't know if mine is simply a clarification question. It appears to me that educated females are more effective in energy consumption reduction, both if they receive information about that, or even in the general treatment where they are not informed. Am I correct? Because five columns, and you, as far as I remember, you have negative and significant results for reduction, even in the third, fourth, and fifth column.
Thank you very much for the question. What I have presented there, firstly, I showed you that effect of the both information and the cost treatments for the whole sample. And in this case, the effect was insignificant. Then what we did, we ran these estimations only for the subsamples of the females, which is slightly more than half of our sample, about 51%. And in this case, if we run the estimations only for the households where the energy bills are paid and managed by female, the impact was negative and statistically significant. once we further restrict the estimation procedure for the females which are highly educated, who have a higher education, then the effect grows further in size. So in fact, the effect is almost twice as large as just for the sample of the females. And in our sample, educated females are about 25% of the whole sample. So in Armenia, the rate of higher education is quite high. It's about 50%. And therefore, it's like half of our sample are females and half of them are actually educated. So these findings have like an important aspect, because like 25% of adults in Armenia are highly educated females. So it's like 25% of the adult population.
So the message of your paper is that if you want to reduce electricity consumption, you have to push a female to school.
Yes, this is exactly. So this is the first conclusion. And second conclusion is that if we want this, because information provision experiments are still have some costs, right? And there is a possibility both to reduce cost and increase efficiency if we target those programs at females and specifically at the educated ones.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there other questions on the paper?
I would say that this would be a big result of the whole meeting. So the role of female for conservation and better use of energy. So this is something very, very new and
very interesting. Yeah,
very to be underlined.
Yes, yes, we were very happy about the results, because initially when we ran the regression and we saw that the results are statistically insignificant, we got a little bit upset, because we already collected the data, we spent the grant and etc., because it is costly to collect primary data. But then we started to look at the subsamples and we found these results, and now we're happy actually.
Has to be read in deep.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, so I find a question to Vittorio. You concluded your analysis saying that gas in the future will be, is projected to be much cheaper than today, and so to gain role with respect, for example, to renewable. But you know that there is the taxonomy coming, the European taxonomy, and in particular the Complementary Act on gas and nuclear activity. And in the taxonomy analysis, gas is considered but only as a transitional fuel. And by 2035, gas, for example, gas used for electricity generation has to be substituted by green alternatives, so non-fossil gases. So how do you react to this, this observation?
I'm in agreement with you. It's true that gas has to play a role, especially in the future, as a backup to sustain the renewables. In any case, natural gas must be there to integrate, because the renewables cannot do everything. We know their characteristics. So keeping the long time needed to develop all the renewables and so on, I think that to ignore the role of natural gas can be a very dangerous thing. Yes.
So do you believe that the taxonomy is too optimistic on the possibility of substituting completely fossil gas by 2035?
Yes, maybe up to 35 the gas is certain, and also we have to consider natural gas as also an interesting perspective of green gas, so a gas coming from the residues and so on. So, and also natural gas can transport also in the future hydrogen. So I think that the role is there, and we should not overvalue the role of renewables while paying all the due attention. Otherwise, we are risking to the same what happened today. So in any case, we have to substitute a substantial part of Russian gas. So this must be something that must be done. So they also consider that from the first graph, you see that it's not easy to reduce drastically. So it's not a source of energy that will increase dramatically, but as will have its own role at least at the dimension of 2035. Then we shall see also if the programs for the renewables go on as mentioned, because this terrible crisis has also, inflation has reduced the capability to make investments.
Yeah.
Of course, investment also for natural gas, this can be true. But natural gas is...
But this is exactly the scope of the taxonomy, to funnel investments in the right direction.
Yes, yes, but also...
Make more costly to invest in dirt technology and less costly to invest in green ones. So that's the point. Okay, I think we are coming to the end of this session. I thank all presenters and thank you also for the replies and the discussion. So I have to close now the meeting because there are the other section ready to come. So good afternoon to all of you and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of the conference.